This is Kira, and today I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful pair of Christmas stockings, using a panel of printed cotton from Dashwood Studios. You can see that on the front of the stockings you have a beautiful stag or bunny design, and on the reverse side you've got presents and Christmas trees. The printed panel is finished with gorgeous metallic gold accents, and in your sewing kit you will find everything you need to make two beautiful stockings, including the printed panel, the fleece wadding and a pretty pin spot turquoise cotton lining as well. So let's get started.
Let's start by opening up our kit and seeing what's inside. So in your stocking making kit from Flying Bobbins, you will have everything that you need to make two Dashwood Studios Christmas stockings. So you will get one panel of pin spot printed cotton, and that's to line your stockings with. You will get your Dashwood Studios panel, and this is a pre-printed panel which has on it two stockings, so back and front, and then you also have down the side here some fabric to make your hanging loops with. And then you get a panel of Fusible Fleece, which will give a nice bit of body to your stocking, and that has a gluey side, so we're just going to use that and fuse that to your stocking panel to give it a bit of body. So those are the three items that you get in your sewing kit. On the other side, actually, it's worth showing you. They've used up the spare space just to print off some cute little pictures that you could sort of cut out and applique onto other makes, so that's quite a sweet little addition to this panel as well. But what we're going to be working with today are these stocking pieces here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and these little rectangles at the side which we're going to make our hanging loops with. So you'll need to set up your sewing machine and your ironing board as well, and you're going to need some fabric scissors, some clips or pins. Wonder clips are quite useful for this project. Some little thread snips, and then I'm just going to thread my machine up with a white thread that will just go with this project, and it's time to get started. So if you unfold your stocking panel, the first thing that we're going to do is get cutting. So you will notice that you have a white border all the way around the outside edge of your stocking panels. You are going to cut around that white border. So that is 1 centimetre deep. That gives you your 1 centimetre seam allowance. So you're going to disregard this grey spotty background, and you are just going to cut around the outer edge of that white border. And you're going to do that for all 4 of your stocking pieces, and then you're going to cut out around each of these rectangles. So there's mine all cut out. You've got your 2 pairs of stocking pieces, and I've paired mine up like that so that when I make my stocking I have a red side with the little presents on, and then on the other side I have my my stag with my Christmas trees and my robin. And the other one pairs up like this, so you've got the bunnies on the front and then the white background with the Christmas trees on the back, but you can swap those over if you like, it's up to you, but I'm going to pair mine up like that. Then I've got my 4 hanging loops. We're only actually going to need 2 of those, so you know, you've got a choice of colours there. And then I've just kept my little band there that had those pretty little pictures on. You can use them for something else. So next we'll cut out our lining. I'm going to take my lining piece of fabric, there's my selvage there, You might have a selvage with some printing on it. I'm going to fold this piece of fabric in half, and this is an 88 centimetre piece of fabric that has been cut in half, so you've just got the one selvage there. So I'm just going to fold it this way. This is what I find is best, and this is the piece of fabric that you get in your kit, which measures 88 centimetres by 75 centimetres. And then I'm just going to use my stocking panels as templates. And I've just zoomed you out a bit there so that we can see that a bit clearly. So there's my fold there. I folded the fabric in half. There's my selvage there. So I folded that panel of fabric in half, and I've laid my stocking panels down. And I'm going to use those stocking panels as a template to cut out my linings. And because it's folded in half, I will, of course, when I open it up, I will have a pair. I'm not going to get too fussed about the grain lines on this. I'm not making anything terribly complicated, but I can just eyeball it to see this line here is parallel to this line. If you kick it off slightly, then you're slightly off grain, but you don't have to be too fussed. You don't have to be too worried about it. Just going to kind of eyeball it like that. So this line here is parallel, and this line here is parallel to that, and I can just sort of see that that's about right. So I can then pin my stocking panel all the way around through both layers, and then just cut around it, just like I'm cutting around a pattern piece. I can do that with both of my stocking panels, and that will give me 4 pieces of fabric. I have a nice bit of spare as well that I can use for making some smaller ornaments or decorations if I like. If you've got a rotary cutter, you could just whiz that around the edge to be super quick as well. So I've just pinned that all the way around. Do the same for the other one. And once pinned, we can then just cut all the way around the outside there. So we will end up with 4 stocking lining panels. So that's cut out now, and I've got my 2 layers there which create a pair of lining panels. It doesn't matter which of the 2 stocking pieces that you use, because you're creating pairs. So then I'm going to cut this one, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter just to show you. So just carefully use your rotary cutter to cut round the outside, and it's up to you whether you use a rotary cutter or scissors. Okay, so that's the lining and the stocking cut out. We'll remove the pins, and the last thing that we need to cut out is our fusible fleece. So here's my fleece. It measures 90 centimetres wide, and it's a ½ metre piece, so it's 50 by 90 centimetres. I'm just going to fold that in half, selvage to selvage. So there's my selvage, which is printed with instructions. There's my fold there, and that will just allow me to again cut out 1 pair, or 2 pairs I should say, and I'm not going to worry too much about the grain lines on the fusible fleece. Doesn't really have a grain as such, so we're just going to squeeze those on. And again, I can just pin around the outside edge and use my scissors to cut around, or if you like, you can use your rotary cutter. Just the same as we did before, and because this is folded in half, you will end up with 2 pairs. One pair cut out. that's all cut out, so just remove the pins. And everything's cut out. So that's everything now cut out. So you have got all your pieces for each of your stockings. And this includes your front and your back printed panel, one pair of fusible fleece and one pair of printed spot lining for each stocking. And then you just have to decide which colour you're going to use for your hanging loop. So that's just kind of down to a personal preference really. I quite like bright, so I think I quite like the red for that one, or maybe the red for that one, and then maybe the red and white stars for that one. So next we're going to do a bit of ironing, and I'm just going to make one stocking in this video, but obviously you've got two stockings in your kit, so you're just going to repeat the same process for both. So take one of your printed panels and place it face down, and then take one of your fusible fleece panels and put that face down on top, lining up the edges. Now you want to make sure that you've got no bits of thread or fluff or really big creases caught in here, because you don't want to fuse those in. And you've got a rough side, the gluey side, and you've got a smooth side. So you want your gluey side, your rough side, to be facing down, touching your fabric, and you're just going to line that up all the way round. And then I like to use a pressing cloth, otherwise known as a tea towel, and just put that over the top. And then my iron is on a 2 to 3 setting, and I just have to hold it for 15 seconds, which is boring. So just hold and count for 15 seconds. And what that will do is melt the glue from the fusible fleece onto the stocking. So I'm just going to move my iron, hold it in place, count for 15, pick it up, move it, hold it in place, count for 15. You get the idea. It's good to put the radio on for this, or something good on the telly. So those are both now fused. Don't worry if you get a little bit at the edge there, you can just trim that off, that's fine. But those have both now got their fusible fleece fused onto them. Let's start by making our hanging loop. So all you need to do to begin with is just take your hanging loop and fold it in half, right sides together, lengthways like so. And now we're just going to, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to just sew down that edge there. So my machine is threaded up with white thread, and I've just lined my raw edges up there, and it's just 1/4 inch or about 1/2 centimetre, so just a nice narrow seam allowance for this one. And just a straight seam, little back stitch at the beginning and the end. And then another back stitch when you get to the end. So once that's all sewn up, we need to turn it the right sides out. What I'll do is I'll just take a safety pin, a little safety pin, and pin it into the seam allowance like that. And then I can use that safety pin to just feed the back into the tube. A bit fiddly, but it's only a fairly small tube. And then just keep going, kind of caterpillar it down, so scrunch up the fabric there until you can see the safety pin popping out on the other side, and then you're just going to pull it through like so, and then you can take the safety pin out. Then what we need to do is give it a really good press to make it look nice and smart, and the suggestion is on the instructions that we just press it with the seam halfway along, because then what we can do is when we fold that in half we can sort of hide that seam in the middle, and that will create a hanging loop. So I'm just going to go and give that a press now. Okay, so there's my hanging loop there. The seam is just hidden in the middle, and then you just fold that in half, matching the raw edges and concealing the seam inside. You've got a little dotted line on the top edge of your stocking. You're just going to line that up like so, so that the line kind of matches there, and then we'll just pin that in place. You just want all those raw edges to extend past there, but you just want the bottom edge of that to line up with that dotted line, so that when you turn this through, that hanging loop will end up sort of being pointing in a slightly upward direction, rather than if you did it at right angles it would just stick straight out. Putting it at an angle like that means that it just slightly angles upwards. So we just need to add a couple of stitches just to hold that in place. So I will just carefully pop that under my machine, and within the seam allowance I can just remove that pin so that I don't sew over the top of it. We're just going to sew back and forth. So all I'm really doing is holding that in place so that when I make my stocking a bit later, it's held in place. We've attached the hanging loop there. Now the next step is a bit of fun really. If you want to decorate your panel, now is the time to do it. So I am actually going to do a few lines of stitching, I don't know if you can see there, with a metallic gold thread, just to sort of quilt into this panel and give it a bit of texture and a bit of surface interest. And you can really go crazy with this and decorate your panel as you wish. Of course it's quite pretty, the print, so you can just leave it plain as well, but if you've got some sequins or anything that you want to use, you can just hand stitch those on wherever you might need them. And it's always best to do any of this decorative finishing before constructing the stocking itself, so that you can more easily work with it. Now I am going to use some gold metallic thread. Let's show you up on the top of my machine there. That is my Gutermann gold metallic thread. When you're sewing with this, you should reduce your tension slightly. You can also increase your stitch length. Let's move you down a little bit. So yeah, reduce your tension slightly. I'm on a 3. Just to stop the gold thread has lots of different filaments and you don't want them to be damaged, so I just reduce my tension slightly. Use a slightly larger needle because it will have a slightly larger eye and that will make it easier to thread the metallic thread. Use a plain white or a plain lightweight thread in your bobbin. Don't use the gold. You won't be able to use the gold thread in your bobbin, only on the top. And just increase your stitch length ever so slightly, so I've gone for a stitch length of 3. So if the gold thread does not come in your pack, but if you fancy adding some kind of decorative touches and having a bit of fun, then you can do that. So I'm going to do that now. So I'm just going to start by doing some lines of stitching. I won't stress the thread out by back stitching. All of those loose ends are going to end up being caught when I make the stocking. So you can see that chain stitch there. I'm going to do the same at the top. So I've decorated my panels. I've just added that sparkly stitch to the back and front, just in straight lines following the design of the border at the top there, and then again around the heel and the toe of the stocking. And where we've quilted that panel, or where we've fused that panel with the interfacing, it kind of, the stitches sink in there and give it a nice quilted quality. So I've got my back and front panels. My next thing to do is just to put those right sides together. I'm going to clip or pin all the way round the outside edge. If you notice any cheeky little thread tails, you can pull them away. So we're just going to pin or clip all the way round, and then we have a 1 centimetre seam allowance on this. So we're just going to sew all the way round with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and don't forget to go back to your universal thread, your sew all thread, and your put your tension back to normal and your stitch length back to normal after you've done that decorative stitching. If you've been fiddling about with your settings on your machine, just put them all back to normal, and then we're going to sew the stocking together. And I'm back with my white thread, and with a 1 centimetre seam allowance I am going to sew all the way around the perimeter of the stockings. So I'll do a back stitch to begin with. Just realised I'd switched my speed right down as well. There we go. So my raw edges there are just matched up to my 10 centimetre line. So when you get to the curve, you can just take it nice and slowly and just guide your stocking around that curved edge. You can lift your foot, making sure that your needle is down every so often, just to draw yourself round the curve there. And there we are. So just turn that through to right sides out, just to check that you're happy with everything, just to check that you've not got any little holes or gaps. And once you're happy, then you can turn it back inside out again once more. But it's always good before you progress on to the next step, just to check. You don't want to get to the end of your project and find that you've got a little hole somewhere. So the next thing to do is just very carefully, now we know everything's good, we'll just trim into the seam allowance just around any curves. So we don't want to cut our stitches, but we just want to create a couple of little snips into the curve towards the stitch line, just to help it turn through. Especially on this inside curve here, you'll get pleats and puckers if when you turn it through. So by stitching in there, that releases that area. It means it will turn through nicely. Just go around the toe. Be careful not to cut your stitches. That's all done. So we'll now take our 2 pieces of lining fabric and do exactly the same again. So we get right sides together, match up raw edges, pin or clip, and then we're going to sew with a 1 centimetre seam allowance around the edge. Now the only difference here is that we want to leave a gap. We want that gap to be big enough to fit your hand in so that you can pull everything through to right sides. Now whenever I need to leave a gap in a lining like this, my trick is to take pins and put 2 pins at the beginning and end of the gap, and then that reminds me that I'm supposed to leave a gap, because I think, why are they there? There we go. So I'm going to pin round the remainder and then sew all the way around that. So again, 1 centimetre seam allowance. Once I get to those twin pins, I do the back stitch and then come to the end of my gap. Left quite a big gap there actually, and start again. Okay, so once that's done, you trim off your thread tails, trim those threads where we made that gap as well. And then, just like before, we want to trim in to the seam allowance on any of those curves so that when we turn it through it will sit nicely. And of course this is the lining, so it will sit on the inside, but it's still nice to have everything sitting nice and flat. Just be careful not to trim into your stitches. And there's my gap in there. So now we're going to turn our lining stocking right sides out. And we're going to tuck it inside our outer fabric. So right sides are together, so you've got one stocking inside the other. You want to make sure that they line up so that your toe is in here when it turns through. I can feel that that's my toe in there, it's lining up nicely. And you want to make sure that you then match up your seam allowances at the top there and just pin them together to begin with. Pin or clip them together. Just press them to one side or press them open. And we're now just going to stitch all the way around the top edge of the stocking. So matching together those raw edges at the top. And I find it easier to do this way round with the lining inside because the fleece is a bit bulky. There you go, so I've stitched or I've clipped that all the way around there. Take off the free arm of your machine and that will allow you to put your stocking on the end like that, and that means that you can get all the way around the top nice and easily. Again, line up that raw edge at the top with the 1 centimetre line, and then we're going to go round in a circle. So I've come all the way around that top edge with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. You can now pull that lining out. So you kind of have like a double-ended stocking. And then find your gap and you're going to pull the whole thing through that gap. It's the moment of truth, the exciting bit. Do the same on the heel and the toe of the lining. Now before we finish off, we just want to close that gap, so you can give it a quick press with the iron. So everything's turned through. Good idea to give that bit a really good little press, and then we are just going to stitch this gap closed. And then we just want to come just to the edge of that gap, a few back stitches to begin with, and then just along the edge of the fabric, a few stitches to close that gap. And this is going to be on the inside, so I'm not worried that I'm using a white thread. Polka dots are white anyway. So there it is. And the last thing to do is just to tuck your lining into your stocking. You can give it a little press all the way around the top. I quite like having a little bit of the turquoise spotty just peeping over because it looks really pretty. It picks up on the turquoise of the bunny's scarf. Oh, it looks so exciting in there. I wonder what Father Christmas is going to put in there. So yes, one little press and that is your stocking finished. Now, if you've just found me on YouTube, then thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this sew along today. Please do subscribe so that you don't miss out on all my future sew alongs, which will include festive projects, seasonal projects, projects which will help you learn new sewing techniques as well as dressmaking projects. If you need any supplies at all for your sewing, then please visit my website flyingbobbins.com or drop me an email at hello@flyingbobbins or simply pop a comment below and I should be happy to help you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a very Merry Christmas.